My name is Arthur Belliveau. I am 64 years old, and I spent 31 years as a forensic accountant for the Canada Revenue Agency. I know how people hide money. I know how they lie about it, and I know better than most exactly what it looks like when someone is planning to steal from you. Last Thanksgiving, my son and his wife sat at my dining table in Oakville, ate the turkey I had been basting since 7 in the morning, and told me I was too old to manage my own affairs. When I said no, my daughter-in-law stood up, knocked her wine glass across the table into my lap, scalding hot, Merlot, the good bottle I had opened for the occasion, and screamed that I was a selfish, stubborn old man who didn't deserve what he had. My son said nothing. I smiled, excused myself, went upstairs to change my shirt, and sent one text message to my solicitor. It started, Thanksgiving dinner. We're in phase 1. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been ready for this moment for 5 months. The cameras in the dining room and the kitchen had been recording since September. The trust documents had been filed with my solicitor in August, and the decoy bank account, the one my son thought held my savings, had been sitting at a balance of $412 since July. Let me tell you how it began. It was a Wednesday in late May when my son called. His name is Kevin. He's 42 years old. He works in commercial real estate in the Hamilton area, and he has his mother's chin and his grandfather's stubbornness, and it turned out his wife's appetite for other people's money. I was in the backyard when he called, pulling up the last of the spring weeds along the fence where Marguerite used to grow her tomatoes. My wife passed 4 years ago, ovarian cancer. She was 60 years old. We had been married 37 years, and I will tell you honestly that I have not had a single day since where the house hasn't felt slightly too quiet. Kevin's number came up on my phone. I pulled off my gardening glove and answered, Dad, hey, you busy? Just gardening. Right, yeah. He paused the way he always does when he wants something. A half beat too long. So, Chantal and I were talking. We want to come up for a visit soon. Maybe bring the kids. I leaned against the fence. Chantal is his wife. We have never been close. She grew up in Brossard, outside Montreal, and she has always treated me, with a kind of polite tolerance, the way you might tolerate a relative's mediocre cooking without saying so out loud. She had been to this house perhaps 6 times in 9 years of marriage. That's fine, I said. When were you thinking? Maybe Thanksgiving weekend. We could all do a big dinner. I said that sounded lovely. I hung up and stood there in Marguerite's garden for a long time. She hated this house. Chantal. She told Kevin 3 years ago that it was outdated, that the neighborhood was declining, that a man my age rattling around a 4-bedroom house in Oakville was, in her words, impractical. Kevin had relayed this to me once, in the context of suggesting I downsize. I had smiled and changed the subject. This was not a Thanksgiving visit. I went inside, made myself a cup of tea, and called my solicitor. Her name is Beverly. We went to Carleton together in the late 70s, before I went into accounting and she went into law. She has been my solicitor for 20 years, and she is, without question, the most unsentimental person I have ever known, which is precisely why I trust her. Beverly, I said, I need to talk to you about something. She didn't ask questions over the phone. We met the next morning at her office on Lakeshore. I had known for about 3 months that something was wrong. The signs were small at first. Kevin had started calling more frequently, which should have been a comfort, but felt calculated. He asked questions about my pension, about my CPP payments, about the house. What do you think it's worth these days, Dad? The market's been wild, with a conversational lightness that I recognized immediately. I had spent 31 years listening to people ask questions with that same careful lightness while they waited to see what you knew. I'd also learned, through my own sources, an old colleague at the CRA, who still ran searches as a favor, that Kevin was in serious financial trouble. His commercial real estate firm had taken on a development project in the Hamilton Mountain area that had stalled badly. He had personally guaranteed a portion of the financing. The numbers I was looking at suggested he was carrying somewhere in the neighborhood of $380,000 in personal liability that he had not disclosed to anyone, including me. I also learned that Chantal had, 6 months prior, met with a lawyer in Mississauga who specialized in elder law and estate disputes, not to draft a will, to ask about the legal process for having a parent declared incapable of managing their own finances under the Substitute Decisions Act. That is when I called Beverly. "They're going to make a move," I told her, sitting across from her in her office, the lake gray and flat through the window behind her. "I don't know exactly when, I don't know exactly how, but they're coming for the house and they're coming for the accounts." Beverly looked at me for a long moment. "How sure are you?" "I spent 31 years at the CRA," I said. "I'm sure. We spent 2 hours that morning setting things in motion. By the end of the month, all of my real assets, the house, the investment accounts, the RRSP, the savings bonds Marguerite had accumulated over 20 years, were restructured into the Marguerite Belliveau Family Trust, named after my wife, administered by Beverly with full documentation. The house technically belonged to the trust. My accounts, the real ones, were inaccessible to anyone without Beverly's authorization. The account Kevin knew about, the one I had mentioned to him once, years ago, during a conversation about estate planning, I left open. I put $412 in it and left it sitting there like bait on a hook. I also called a security contractor I'd worked with during my time at the CRA. He installed 4 cameras: dining room, kitchen, front hallway, and the study where I keep my filing cabinet. Pinhole lenses, motion activated. Everything streamed to a private server Beverly had access to. And then I waited. Thanksgiving fell on the second Monday of October. Kevin and Chantal arrived Sunday evening with their 2 kids, who are 8 and 11 and perfectly nice children who had nothing to do with any of this. They pulled up in a black Acura MDX that I knew, from my research, cost more than Kevin could comfortably afford. Chantal stepped out wearing a coat that had not come from anywhere modest. I opened the door. "Dad?" Kevin hugged me. It was a real hug, the kind that reminded me of when he was young, and it cost me something. Chantal air-kissed my cheek. "Arthur, the house looks nice." What she meant, and I knew what she meant because I had learned to read her in the way you learn to read anyone who is concealing something, was that the house looked like money. 4 bedrooms, corner lot, detached garage, a street in Oakville where the lots alone go for over $1 million. Her parents, who I had never met, arrived an hour later. Their names are Fernand and Laurette. They drove up from Brossard in a mid-sized sedan that looked like it had been through some years. Fernand was a large man with a red face and small, careful eyes. Laurette was thin and quiet and watched everything. They had been introduced to me as being between places right now. Kevin had said this on the phone the week before, casually, the way you might mention the weather. I had asked no follow-up questions. The dinner was pleasant on the surface. I made roast turkey, stuffing with wild rice the way Marguerite used to do it, roasted root vegetables, and a cranberry sauce I had made from scratch. The children ate quickly and disappeared to watch television. The adults sat around the table with the good wine I had opened, and for a while it was almost normal. Fernand told a long story about a property dispute he'd had with a neighbor in Brossard. I listened politely. Laurette asked twice about the neighborhood, which schools were nearby, whether the street was quiet at night. I answered pleasantly. Chantal asked about my health. "You're looking a little tired, Arthur," she said. "Have you been sleeping?" "Perfectly well," I said. "Kevin worries," she said. "We both do. A man your age, alone in a house this size." She glanced around the dining room with what was meant to look like concern. "It must be a lot to keep up. This was the first probe. Not the demand yet, just the testing of the ground." I let out a small sigh. "Oh, it keeps me busy," I said. "I like having the space." I reached over and touched the edge of Marguerite's tablecloth, the good linen one she'd bought at a shop on Queen Street when we were young, and let a flicker of something sad pass across my face. Not too much, just enough. Laurette watched this and nodded slowly. Kevin cleared his throat. "Dad," he said, "there's actually something we wanted to talk to you about." I set my fork down. I folded my hands in my lap. I waited. He looked at Chantal. She gave him a small nod, the kind that means go on, I'm right here. "We've been thinking," he said, "about you and about the house and about the future. Chantal's parents are in a difficult situation right now, as you know, and this house has so much space, and we all thought, that maybe it would make sense if they moved in here, just temporarily, until things stabilize for them." Temporarily. The word landed on the table between us. I looked at Fernand. He had his wineglass in his hand and was looking at the wall. He was not surprised. He had known this was coming. This had been planned well before the Acura pulled out of Hamilton. "Move in here," I said slowly. "It makes sense," Chantal said, her voice warming now, becoming the voice of practical compassion. You rattle around this place by yourself. You said yourself that the yard is getting to be too much, and Mom and Dad could help out with the cooking, the maintenance. It would be good for everyone. And Kevin added, we'd probably be up more often ourselves, to check in, to help manage things. Manage things. There it was. The phrase I had been waiting for. Not the house, not his parents-in-law's housing situation. Manage things. That was the door they were trying to open. Once Fernand and Laurette were inside these walls, once Kevin had a reason to be present every weekend, the next step would follow naturally. The accounts, the paperwork. Dad, you don't have to worry about the finances, we can take care of that for you. I had spent 5 months preparing for this exact moment. I looked at my son. He was looking at the table. He couldn't quite meet my eyes, and I noticed that, and I filed it away, and it hurt me in a place I hadn't expected. I'll have to think about it, I said quietly. Chantal's expression flickered. Of course, she said. Take your time. We finished dinner. I served the pie I had made, butter tart filling, because Marguerite had always made it at Thanksgiving, and we talked about other things, and the children came back for dessert, and for a while it was fine. Then I stood up to clear the plates. I had been thinking, while I ate my pie, about what to do next, about whether to wait another day, another conversation, or whether the moment had already arrived. I thought about what Beverly and I had planned. I thought about the cameras in the corners of the room. I thought about Marguerite. Actually, I said, setting down the stack of plates and turning back to the table, I've thought about it. Everyone went still. The answer is no, I said. Fernand and Laurette, I wish you well, and I hope things improve for you. But this house is not available. It was not available when my son suggested it last year, and it is not available now. I looked at Kevin, and I know what the next question was going to be, about the accounts, about management. And that answer is also no. The silence in the room was the specific kind that happens when people have rehearsed a scenario that is suddenly not going to plan. Then Chantal stood up. Her chair scraped back hard against the floor. The children in the next room went quiet. You're being selfish, she said. Her voice was low and tight, and the French accent she usually kept softened came through hard and clear. You know that? You sit in this house with all these rooms, with Fernand and Laurette sleeping in a cousin's basement in Brossard, and you say no? What is wrong with you? Chantal, Kevin said. Non. She turned to me. You have 4 bedrooms, Arthur. 4. How many do you use? 1. She reached over and picked up her wine glass, and I don't think she intended to do what she did next. I think it was impulse, the kind that comes when someone has been patient for too long and stops calculating. She threw it. Not at me, exactly. Toward me. A sideways, furious gesture that sent the glass arcing off the table and catching my forearm before it hit the floor. The wine, good Merlot, $85, I remembered buying it, went across my sleeve and the front of my shirt. The glass didn't shatter. It bounced off the hardwood and spun under the sideboard. The room went absolutely silent. My forearm stung where the rim had caught it, a thin red line already beginning to rise. Nothing serious, but visible, documented by the camera in the upper left corner of the dining room, which had been running since the moment Fernand and Laurette walked through my door. I looked at Chantal. She was standing with her hands still partly extended, her face moving through shock, and then back toward anger, because anger was easier. Kevin had not stood up. He was still sitting, his napkin still on his lap, looking at his plate. Laurette had her hand over her mouth. Fernand was very carefully looking at his wine glass. I reached over and picked up my own napkin and pressed it against my forearm. I looked at it for a moment. Then I looked at my son. Kevin, I said, I'm going to ask everyone to leave now. He finally looked at me. His face was pale and very young-looking in the way his face sometimes gets under stress, the way it had when he was a boy and had done something he knew was wrong. Dad, please leave my house, I said. I'll call you tomorrow. I walked them to the door. Chantal would not look at me. Fernand muttered something in French to Laurette. The children came out of the living room confused and tired, and Kevin took them by the hands, and they filed out onto the porch into the October night. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a moment. The house was quiet. The kitchen light was still on. I could smell the turkey. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and called Beverly. She picked up on the second ring. It happened, I said. How bad? She threw a wine glass, caught my forearm. It's on camera. A pause. All right, I'm calling Dr. Yoon tonight. You need documentation. Dr. Yoon is my physician, a calm, precise woman at a clinic in South Oakville. I drove there the following morning. She examined my forearm, a contusion, she called it, with a minor laceration along the edge, and photographed it for my medical file. I asked her to note in the record the time, the circumstances as I described them, and the fact that I was paying out of pocket rather than submitting to OHIP, so that the visit stood as a separate documented record. She looked at me over her reading glasses. You've done this before, she said. Not exactly this, I said, but something like it. I texted Beverly from the parking lot. Phase 1 is complete. What happened next I watched from my laptop in Marguerite's reading room, the small room at the back of the house that overlooks the garden. The camera feeds were streamed through Beverly's server, and I could access them from my phone or my computer. I watched as Kevin and Chantal sat in their car in my driveway for 22 minutes after leaving, the interior light on, Chantal's gestures visible through the window, rapid and precise. They went to a hotel, the Delta on Lakeshore. I know because Kevin used the credit card that I still, technically, co-signed on from years ago when he was getting started, a detail they had apparently forgotten. At 11:15 that night, Kevin called me. I did not answer. At 11:40, Chantal sent me a text message that said, "Arthur, I want to apologize for what happened. I was upset. I think we should talk when everyone has calmed down." I read it. The next morning, Kevin called again. I answered this time. "Dad, I'm so sorry about last night. She shouldn't have. What she did was wrong, I know that." "Yes," I said. My voice was quiet, steady. I had decided on the way home from Dr. Yoon's what role I was going to play in whatever came next, and it was not the role they expected. "It's all right, Kevin. I know she was upset. He paused. "We're worried about you. That's all this is. We worry." "I know," I said. "I worry too, about a lot of things." There was a careful silence. "Dad, about what we discussed last night. Let's not discuss it on the phone. Come back for lunch. Just you, not Chantal. Just come and we'll talk." He came at noon. I made soup. We sat at the kitchen table, not the dining room. I didn't want that room, and I played the part of a man who was slowly, reluctantly, coming to see the reasonableness of his family's concern. I let my hands tremble slightly when I poured the tea. I said, "I know I can't manage this house forever." I said, "Maybe you're right that I need more help." Kevin's posture changed as I spoke. His shoulders dropped. He leaned forward. The calculation came back into his face, the careful watching that I recognized from every interview I had ever conducted with someone who thought they were beginning to get what they wanted. "We just want what's best for you," he said. "I know," I said. "Give me a few weeks. Let me think about it properly." He left at 2 o'clock looking satisfied. I watched the driveway through the kitchen window until his Acura turned the corner. Then I called Beverly. "He thinks I'm softening," I said. "Good," she said. "Let them think it. What they did with that time, I know because I was watching, was accelerate." 3 days after Thanksgiving, Chantal contacted the elder law lawyer in Mississauga again. I know this because Beverly had anticipated it and had a colleague monitoring filings. The lawyer began drafting a capacity assessment referral under the Healthcare Consent Act. The plan was clear. If they could establish, through a physician's documentation, that I was showing signs of cognitive decline, they could petition for a guardianship order and take control of my financial decisions. They also, 4 days after Thanksgiving, contacted my bank. Kevin called and asked to speak to someone about his father's account, citing concern about elder financial vulnerability. The bank's elder care line flagged it and called me, because I had, 6 weeks earlier, placed a specific instruction on my account that any third-party inquiry trigger an immediate call to me directly. The woman at the bank was apologetic and professional. "Your son called, Mr. Belliveau. He seemed concerned. Thank you for letting me know," I said. "Please note that I am perfectly well and that no third party has authorization over any of my accounts." "Already noted, sir." The bank account they had tried to access had $412 in it. 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, on a Thursday afternoon, Chantal arrived at my house alone. She had not called ahead. She rang the doorbell at 2:15, and I watched her on the front hallway camera for a moment before I opened the door. She was composed. She had dressed carefully, I noticed, professional looking, the kind of clothes you wear when you want to be taken seriously. "I wanted to apologize properly," she said. "In person. Can I come in?" I stepped back and let her in. We sat in the living room. She apologized for the wine glass. She said it was inexcusable and that she was ashamed of herself. She sounded sincere, and some part of me believed that she was. In that particular way, where a person can be genuinely sorry about a specific action while remaining entirely committed to the larger plan that produced it. Then she said, "I brought some paperwork, just to look at. Nothing to sign. Kevin and I have been talking to a financial advisor, and there are some options that might make things simpler for you." She put a folder on the coffee table. I looked at it. I did not touch it. "What kind of options?" I asked. "Well, a power of attorney, to start, just for finances, so that if anything ever happened to you, Kevin could step in smoothly. It's very common, Arthur. Most people our age set them up." Our age. She was 39. "And there might be some questions about the house title, about whether a joint tenancy structure would give you better protection." Joint tenancy. If I died, Kevin would automatically inherit the property, bypassing any trust or will. I looked at her. I let the silence run a few seconds longer than was comfortable. "Let me read it over," I said. She smiled. "Of course. Take your time." I walked her to the door 20 minutes later. She hugged me briefly and told me to call Kevin whenever I was ready. I watched her car back out of the driveway. Then I went back inside and called Beverly. "She brought the POA paperwork," I said. Beverly exhaled. "They're moving faster than I thought. Arthur, I think we're ready." "So do I said. We had planned for 2 scenarios. The first was that they would keep pressure on through documents and conversation, in which case we would wait them out and expose the capacity assessment referral when the time was right. The second was that they would escalate physically, enter the house without permission, attempt to access the filing cabinet, or try to locate the account documents they believed were stored in my study. What Beverly and I had not quite anticipated was the combination. On the Saturday of the following weekend, Kevin drove up alone. He used his key. I had given him a key years ago for emergencies, and let himself into the house at 11 in the morning while I was, as far as he knew, at my walking group at Bronte Creek. The front hallway camera picked him up the moment he stepped inside. He went straight to my study. I was not at Bronte Creek. I was upstairs in Marguerite's reading room, watching the feed on my laptop, with Beverly on the phone. I watched my son open the filing cabinet. I watched him go through the folders. I watched him photograph documents with his phone, the visible ones, the ones I had arranged deliberately in the cabinet months ago, the ones that referenced the decoy account and a fictitious RRSP balance I had fabricated from a template. He was in the house for 31 minutes. He found nothing real. Everything real was in Beverly's office in a fireproof cabinet under a trust that no one could touch without a court order. When he left, I waited 15 minutes. Then I called him. "Kevin," I said, "did you stop by this morning? I thought I heard someone in the house." A pause. "Oh, yeah, Dad. Sorry, I should have called. I was in the area and I just popped in to check on things, make sure the pipes were okay." "The pipes," I said. "Yeah, it's getting cold." I was worried. "That's thoughtful," I said. "Listen, Kevin, I've been thinking about what Chantal and I discussed. I think I'm ready to talk seriously. Can you come by Thursday?" He said yes immediately. Thursday, I called Beverly at 7 in the morning. "Are the detectives ready?" "Constable Morrison and Detective Okafor," she said. "They'll be there at 2. I spent the morning baking banana bread. I don't know why, exactly. It felt like the right thing to do." Kevin arrived at 1:30. He looked well-rested, cautiously optimistic. He brought Tim Hortons coffee, which was a gesture that made me sad in a way I hadn't expected. He sat down at the kitchen table, and I gave him a slice of banana bread, and we talked about his kids for a few minutes. Then I said, "I've thought about the power of attorney." He leaned forward slightly. "Yeah? I want to be clear about my finances first," I said. "I want you to understand what there is and what there isn't before we sign anything." I stood up. "Come into the study. I'll show you the accounts." He followed me. He stood in the doorway of my study as I sat down at the desk and opened the laptop. I turned the screen toward him. "This is the main account," I said. I showed him the decoy. "And I've been thinking, if you're going to manage things, you should know where everything is." He nodded. He was watching the screen carefully. "The filing cabinet has most of the documents," I said. "The house title, the investment accounts, it's all in there." I gestured toward the cabinet. He crossed the room and opened it. That was when I pressed the button on the small remote control in my pocket, and the reading room wall opened, not dramatically. It is a standard door, built into the bookcase, which Marguerite had installed years ago because she liked the idea of a secret room and I had indulged her. Behind it was Beverly, and behind Beverly were Constable Morrison and Detective Okafor from the Halton Regional Police. Kevin turned around. The color left his face so completely and so quickly that for a moment I thought he might faint. "Dad," he said. It came out as barely a sound. "Kevin," I said. I kept my voice even. "I want you to sit down." He sat. Beverly set her briefcase on the desk. Constable Morrison stood near the door. Detective Okafor took out his notebook. I let Beverly speak first. "Kevin Belliveau," she said, "we have, on camera, your unauthorized entry to this property on the 14th of October. We have documentation of your attempt to access and photograph your father's private financial records without his consent. We have recordings of 2 conversations in which you and your wife discussed seeking a capacity assessment under false pretenses. We have a record of your attempt to access your father's bank account through the bank's elder care line." Kevin opened his mouth. "We also have," she continued, "the folder Chantal left here 3 weeks ago, which contains a power of attorney document that has already been partially filled in, including your father's name, without his knowledge or participation." That one landed. I watched it land. Kevin had not known about the folder. Chantal had gone ahead without telling him, which meant they were not, entirely, as coordinated as they thought. Detective Okafor spoke then. He was direct and calm and professional. He explained what Kevin was looking at: breach of trust, unauthorized access to financial records, and participation in what constituted a fraudulent scheme to gain control of a vulnerable adult's finances under Ontario law. He explained that no charges had been laid yet. He explained that laying them was entirely my choice. Kevin looked at me. "Dad," he said. His voice was different now, stripped of everything he'd rehearsed. "I'm in trouble. I've been in trouble for 2 years and I didn't know how to tell you." "I know," I said. "The development project, 380,000, I said. Personal guarantee. Hamilton Mountain." "I know, Kevin." He closed his eyes. "I was scared," he said. "I didn't know what else to do. I looked at my son, my 42-year-old son, who had learned to ride a bike on the street outside this house, who had cried on this porch when his mother was sick, and I said the hardest thing I have ever said out loud. You could have called me, I said. That is all you had to do. You could have picked up the phone and told me the truth, and I would have helped you. That is what a father does." He put his face in his hands. "I know," he said. "But you didn't," I said. "You let Chantal lead you into this. And you stood in my dining room on Thanksgiving and said nothing while she threw a glass at your father. And you came into my house without permission and went through my private files." "I know," he said again. The room was very quiet. "I'm not going to press charges," I said. "Beverly?" Beverly looked at me. She had not been expecting this either. "Arthur, I'm not pressing charges," I said. "But there are conditions. The power of attorney document is destroyed and no new one is filed without my explicit direction to Beverly. Kevin engages a financial restructuring advisor. Beverly will provide a name to deal with the Hamilton situation properly, without my money and without my house. Chantal does not set foot in this house without my written invitation. And Kevin, you go to counseling. I don't care what kind. You just go." I looked at Okafor. He looked back at me with the expression of a man who has seen a great many family situations and has learned not to have opinions about them. "We'll note it as a family matter resolved without charges," he said. "For now." Kevin left an hour later. He did not hug me at the door. He stood on the porch and looked at the street, at the October maple dropping its leaves on the sidewalk, and then he looked back at me. "Mom would be ashamed of me," he said. "Yes," I said. "She would." He walked to his car. I watched him go. I closed the door and stood in the hallway with the house quiet around me. It has been 7 months now. Kevin is in financial counseling and working with the restructuring advisor Beverly recommended. He calls me every Sunday. We do not talk about Thanksgiving. We talk about his kids and about hockey, and occasionally about the kind of careful, surface-level things that 2 people talk about when they are slowly learning to trust each other again. It is not what we had before. I'm not sure it will ever be what we had before. Chantal has not been back to this house. Fernand and Lorette found a subsidized housing placement in Mississauga. I know this because Kevin mentioned it once, neutrally, and I said I was glad to hear it, and we moved on. The house is mine. Marguerite's trust is intact. The roses she planted along the back fence came up this spring, the red ones she brought from a nursery in Burlington the year we moved in, and I have been tending them the way she showed me. Which is to say imperfectly but with attention. What I learned from all of this is something I already knew from 31 years of investigating financial crimes, but that I had allowed myself to forget when it came to my own family. Love is not an excuse. It is not a reason to lower your defenses. The people who can hurt you most are the ones you have let close enough to know where everything is kept. I loved my son. I still love my son. But I love Marguerite's memory more. And I love the house she made. And I was not willing to let grief and loneliness make me careless with the things she left behind. I didn't need to be angry to protect myself. I just needed to be ready, and I was ready. I had been ready for a long time.